Talk's excellent international editor, Isabel Oakeshott. Welcome, Isabel. Oh, look at you looking all Christmassy in the background. Merry Christmas to you. You know me, Mr. Grinch. Right, well, let's get going. This is something that you highlighted to me for sort of technical legal reasons. We can't really show this. But you and I have been sent a map. It's a map of Britain of all the asylum seeker hotels that are being used. Now, suffice to say that once you've got the little pin prick marks all around the country, you can't really see the country at all. It is just a mass of little markers saying this is where the migrant hotels are. Now, we believe there are something like 250. It's difficult to actually hone in on the accurate figures here because the government keeps them very secret. But we believe there are an estimated 250 hotels have been taken over by the government for the purpose of accommodating asylum seekers and basically illegal migrants. There are 35,651 opportunist foreigners at the moment in such residences. They're staying in hotels at great expense to us, £5.5 million every single night. Now, the thing is, Isabel, you know, as British citizens, if I live in an area, surely I ought to have I ought to know that suddenly 100 or 500 asylum seekers, foreigners, have been billeted in my local hotel. Sometimes it's more than that. Sometimes it's several hotels. Now, the government has an official policy not to tell us. We are not allowed to know whether or not there are asylum seekers staying in hotels near us. You try to find that information out, the government will tell you we do not hand that information out. We've been in touch with the Home Office. Why is that? It's to protect the migrants and the asylum seekers. So their welfare is more important to the government than the right of British citizens to know who's living in their area. This is extraordinary.
It is indeed, and I'm very sorry. First of all, let me issue an apology to our listeners and our viewers that we can't, here on Talk, actually publish this map because I think it is a very wonderful thing. We can't do it because we don't quite know what the consequences would be for us as a broadcasting station and me and you, Kev, as journalists, of putting that information in the public domain. Unfortunately, events recently in which journalists have had a knock at the door from the police for tweeting or putting on social media much less controversial information don't really inspire confidence to the point that I think that if you or I were to put this out there, we could absolutely expect to face some kind of criminal consequences for, I don't know, inciting hatred or some such. And of course, that's not at all what we would be doing in sharing this information. What we would be doing is showing the British taxpayer how and where their money is being spent and what communities, people from overseas whose paperwork and identities we are far from sure of, are living in. And I don't think that is remotely unreasonable. Generally, word spreads pretty quickly, doesn't it, in an area if a hotel has suddenly been taken over for these purposes. But the map is very interesting because it shows you where places are clustered. And in fact, a colleague of mine spent yesterday in Cardiff, and you and I, Kev, were talking a week or so ago about...
City of the migrant village. The non-migrant village, I'm sorry.
Exactly. So we went back to Cardiff to talk and see how many rough sleepers there are there, given that the council there has created an entire multi-squillion pound new village, supposedly, for the homeless. And suffice to say that there are an awful lot of people sleeping rough on the streets who one might have thought would have been offered this accommodation. Meanwhile, there's not one, not two, but 3 migrant hotels in that area. So while British people who've lived all their lives in this country, and whether or not they've paid into the system, they need the support of the state, are rough sleeping on the streets in the freezing cold in the run-up to this Christmas. Those who have just come from overseas are being given comfortable and in some cases borderline luxurious accommodation in taxpayer-funded hotels. Personally, I think that is deeply wrong, and never has there been more of a case for charity beginning at home.
Absolutely. Now, we got in touch with the Home Office about this. I mean, folks, just get this straight. It is official government policy that you shall not know. You are not allowed to know that there are asylum seekers being billeted in hotels near you, that your local hotel that maybe you used to go for a drink to or have a meal in, you know, the hub of the community has now got 400 migrants in it. You're not allowed to know this. The government has an official policy to keep us, British citizens, in the dark about this. This is what the Home Office said to us, Isabel and everybody else, over the phone today. We need to protect the asylum seekers. We are safeguarding them. That is the reason we are not sharing the locations to the public. The spokesman went on to tell us here at Talk that this was a non-story and we had no angle. Well, I'm afraid we do have an angle, and that is that I believe, and I think you agree with me, Isabel, that the citizens of this country have a right to know that 400 foreigners have suddenly moved in just down the road. They went on to say that the riots over the summer is an example of what happens when people have this information. They told us it was a non-story, and then over an email, a Home Office spokesman told Talk, told this programme, the Political Asylum, this government inherited an asylum system under unprecedented strain, with thousands stuck in a backlog without their claims processed, housed in expensive accommodation. Well, one of the missions of this great Labour government of ours was to significantly reduce the use of hotels. And only this week, earlier in the week, we said, hey, we've done it. We've reduced the number of hotels by 7. There are 250 at least.
Wow.
Yeah, but check it out. What they failed to mention when they said this was they'd also commandeered separately 14 more. So the net result was they've increased the number of hotels they're using by 7. But I think the scandal here is, I'd love to know what people think about this, that our government, the government of British citizens, has a policy to prioritise safeguarding foreigners, most of whom arrived here illegally, most of whom are lying. They say, we're fleeing war and torture. Most of whom who are young men. They have a policy to prioritise their safety over our safety. It's an issue of safety to know whether or not there are 400 foreigners living down the road. It's outrageous.
How dare the Home Office preach to us about what is and isn't a story? I'll do my job and they can do theirs. Theirs is safeguarding the British people and controlling our borders. They have manifestly failed on both of those. My job and yours, Kev, is to bring news to the British people. And I think we'll judge what is and isn't a story. And in my view, it is a story where these migrant hotels are located, and the fact that the government wishes to cover that up. And whether or not it's what they consider a story, it's certainly a matter for interesting debate, isn't it? Because, you know, you and I can probably also see the other side of the argument. You know, we saw that there were ugly scenes this summer outside migrant hotels, and none of us want that. I actually don't want the migrant hotels to be there at all, because I don't think that that is a system. But I don't want to see horrible riots and protests and people trying to cause any damage to buildings, and still worse, try to damage people inside those hotels. But what happens when you cover things up and you hide information is that it actually inflames situations. So I don't think it's helpful for information to come out piecemeal, for things to be covered up. I think that that actually sows division and fuels mistrust and actually is quite counterproductive. I would also like to say that yesterday our researcher actually tried to get into some of these migrant hotels, not in any illegitimate way, literally knocking at the door, can we speak to some staff? Nothing improper in that. That's what journalists should do. And the hostility and aggression that they encountered, not only from clusters of I suppose what the Home Office would call clients, i.e. migrants staying there, but also from the staff on the doors of these buildings, was quite extraordinary. I mean, it's entirely legitimate for journalists to ask questions, to say hello, just wondering how, what's going on here and so on. And actually, doors are shut in faces, people shout, don't you dare film anything, and so on and so forth. And I just think all of this is very, very unhealthy. And I pity people who have these facilities in the heart of their communities, because I don't think that it's well managed, and I don't think that it creates any sense of community cohesion. I think what it creates is resentment, and no wonder when you see people rough sleeping just streets away.
Yeah, and this feeds into Keir Starmer's approach to government. He infantilises us. In the summer, the police, the authorities did not trust the British public with the information that there was a terrorist connection to those terrible murders in the Southport dance hall. There was a terrorist connection. The suspect is now charged with possession of an Al-Qaeda military manual and manufacturing ricin poison. We weren't allowed to know that for 3 months. So they don't trust us with this kind of information because they think, I think they suspect we're all far-right thugs, as Keir Starmer liked to portray those rioters during the summer, and that if we get this information, if we know there's a hotel full of asylum seekers down the road, we'll start rioting and trying to set fire to that hotel, which I think is an insult to the great British public.
Well, of course it is, because the vast majority of people, whatever their reservations about having, people that come over the channel in this very, very irresponsible and dangerous way, put up in semi-luxury, at taxpayers' expense, whatever the reservations of most people about that, and I have the deepest of reservations. I'm not going to go out there and start screaming profanities and hurling abuse and, trying to torch these premises. The vast majority of people in this country are both generous and tolerant and law-abiding. So don't insult them and their intelligence by saying, well, you're not grown up or responsible enough to know who is living in your area and what's going on. We are talking about very, very, very large sums of taxpayer money here. And I think, personally, there is a right to know. But I recognise that people will have other views on this. And I think it's a really interesting debate. And I'm sure, maybe one or two of our listeners will come on and say, actually, it's too dangerous. People will have other views to you and I, Kev. But I think it's entirely legitimate for us to discuss it. And for the Home Office to say there's nothing to see here, folks moves on, just jog on by, there's nothing to talk about here, betrays such a lack of understanding about how voters are feeling at this point.
Yeah, and it also feeds into the fact Keir Starmer and his government, his left-wing Labour government, they don't really like Britain, they don't really like British people, they're prioritising foreigners over us because they don't trust us, they don't like us. And by the way, just before we move on, let's reiterate that Home Office spokesperson. Right, listen to this. This is by email. This government inherited an asylum system under unprecedented strain, with thousands stuck in a backlog without their claims processed, housed in expensive accommodation. That is a politically charged statement on behalf of the Labour Party. This is supposed to be the civil service. This is supposed to be the unbiased civil Home Office. They're just acting for the Labour Party. It's outrageous.
Yeah, actually, you make a really good point. They're supposed to be neutral, aren't they? That's a very unseemly statement there, and you said it was backed up by verbal stuff about no story here, you know, what are you talking about, kind of thing. I'm afraid that just gives you a glimpse of the reality of the makeup of the civil service more widely. You know, it is institutionally left-leaning, and we see that time and again with their little protests about implementing conservative government policy, and really quite serious pushback on everything from the fundamentals of Brexit to other policies that they disagree with and think that they have some kind of entitlement to reject. You know, that's not what they sign up for when they become civil servants. If they don't like it, well, then become politicians. The two things are different jobs.
And by the way, let's just finish on a bit of my prejudice. So if these Home Office spokespeople want to be prejudiced about us and say, yeah, this is a non-story, you don't know what you do, this is what happens when people have this, this is a non-story. Well, I'll tell you what, a Home Office spokesperson, Isabel and I, we're journalists. We'll tell you what a story is, because if you knew what a story was, you wouldn't be working as a spokesperson for the bloody Home Office. You'd have a better job, OK? Time to move on. Next up, let's talk about the WASPy women. Stay where you are.